We are studying a text written by Sri Aurobindo in Sanskrit, Upanishadic in style, to which he did not give a name, but which subsequently the editors of this publication have named Sri Aurobindo Upanishad. As we have already seen, there are close similarities between this and the Isha Upanishad. Structurally, the Isha has 18 verses, this has 19, and the 19 are in two batches of 9 each, with one verse in the center which acts like a fulcrum, which says simply, as the shortest verse, "Whatever thus manifests is the world bliss only." The English we are reading is this translation, and so we need to be careful not to take the words to be exactly as Sri Aurobindo would have written. But this idea of the world bliss as the basis and the formation of the origin of the world is permeating throughout this Upanishadic text. The second important idea which permeates throughout is the reality of the world. So, right at the beginning, he establishes that reality, that the world is not false, it is true. And he comes to this conclusion by a development of thought which follows the pattern of an Upanishadic expression, and the translation goes thus: Om, there is Brahman alone, the one without a second. Being and non-being are its forms, and it is also beyond being and non-being. There is nothing else except that. All that is contained in the three times and all that is beyond the three times is indeed that one Brahman alone. Whatever is in the universe, small or large, noble or mean, is Brahman alone. Brahman alone. The world is also Brahman. It is true, not false. So in this first verse we see a certain development of thought, asserting the oneness and the uniqueness of Brahman, that Brahman is alone always. There is no other. And most of these ideas, as they are developed in this sequence, we have seen are elaborated in the Isha Upanishad, and here it is as if much of that is condensed into just this one verse. But at the end of that verse, he says, whatever is in the universe, small or large, noble or mean, is Brahman alone, Brahman alone. And this sets us for the conclusion. The world, which is the manifest part of the totality of Brahman, is therefore also Brahman alone. By saying that small or large, noble or mean, and by noble or mean here we see great or less great, he is breaking out of all the value systems by which we assert something to be divine or not. We would normally expect that something great, something wonderful is divine, but something petty and small is not divine. And that's a value system that we have created for ourselves. And if we apply this value system, then we will say the world, depending on our approach, is massive, infinite, and therefore it is divine. Or if a different approach is taken, the world is tiny, it is the waste product of the totality of the cosmos. And therefore, it is mean, petty, and not divine. Both positions are valid depending on where you look from. From within the experience of the world, we say the world is infinite, it appears eternal, and therefore it is great, and so it can be divine. And this is now a common idea in many New Age teachings to refer to not to the divine but to the universe in place of the divine. And they say the universe talks to me, the universe carries me, the universe gives me messages, and so on. But it's not the same as the divine. The divine is something much greater. And if you shift your poise of observation out of the universe that we are aware of, the material universe, and see the totality of the divine beyond, and the ranges of Satchidananda against which the earth zone or the material worlds are so coarse, crude, dark, that they are described in some of the Upanishadic texts as the waste matter, the byproduct of the cosmic creation, that which is thrown out as waste. In the analogy that Sri Aurobindo develops in Savitri, the wine that is kept for aging, to make it more mellow, more sweet, more perfect, finally settles all its dross and its waste and its dark, bitter portion at the base. Such is the world. And the earth zone, the material zone of it, even though infinite and eternal, is still the worst, petty. So in this line, when he says, whatever is in the universe, small or large, noble or mean, is Brahman alone, it does not matter which perspective we take, it still is Brahman alone. And so the conclusion is, the world is also Brahman, it is true, not false. But there is a subtle play here in the repetition, is Brahman alone, Brahman alone. In the Sanskrit text, as Sri Aurobindo wrote it, he goes, Brahmaiva tad, Brahmaiva, Brahma eva, Brahmaiva, Brahman alone, Tat is that, and again, Brahman alone. If you observe the effect of this line when you repeat it, after all the discussion that there is nothing except that being and non-being are its forms, it is beyond both being and non-being, all that is in the three times, past, present, future, is Brahman alone, everything in the universe, small or large, noble or mean, is Brahman alone, and then Brahmaiva tat, Brahmaiva, Brahman alone, Brahman alone. And it's as if the whole journey of exploration comes to rest and settles on this fundamental reality, Brahman alone, Brahman alone. That's the only thing you can say. And then he draws out this conclusion, the world is also Brahman, it is true, not false. As he places it, it seems so obvious, it seems so simple, but also in the experience, having settled that there is only Brahman, Brahmaiva tat, Brahmaiva, and then from that, when you look at the world, you see the world as true, because it is Brahman. There is nothing other than that. And so, it is true, not false. Having established this, the next verse takes us to a further journey. In the translation, that alone is the transcendent being, beyond all the three times, beyond all the worlds, penetrating all the worlds, beyond being, beyond non-being, all consciousness, all bliss, without beginning and end, the eternal divine. So in this, the focus shifts from the Brahman in the first verse, which is seen as something impersonal, And here in the second verse, it is the personality which is asserted, even though the same sweep is continued. In fact, in the translation, it says, that alone is the transcendent being. And the being is what gives you the sense of personality. But in the Sanskrit, it goes even more directly when it says, Sa eva parat parah purushas trikalatita. Sa eva, sa is he. And literally the translation should have been, he alone is the transcendent being, beyond all the three times, beyond all the worlds, penetrating the worlds, and so on. But the he is the affirmation here. While in the first verse it was Brahman, and so you have the sense of impersonality. The second brings it to the level of personality, but still keeps that sweep. All the times, the three times, transcendence of the worlds, immanence of the worlds, and then beyond being, beyond non-being, which is also common with the first verse. And then comes the affirmation. Because now the personality is much more prominent. He can say immediately after, all being, all consciousness, all bliss. So there is the transcendence, and then there is its fulfillment in the form of being. But he is not merely being, he is all being. The sense of all being carries with it the potentiality of being to become everything, to become the all. In the Sanskrit text, it goes like this: Sanmaya, Chinmaya, Anandamaya. Literally translated, it would be Satmaya, of the nature of Sat, of the nature of sheer existence. Chinmaya, of the nature of pure consciousness, or having pure consciousness, which has been translated as all being, all consciousness, and all bliss. But you see, the Sanskrit contains a very particular sense, having the nature of, containing the nature of, or becoming, expressing that nature. So, sheer existence, sheer consciousness, sheer bliss is He, without beginning and end, the eternal divine. Bhagavan. And Bhagavan again in Sanskrit conveys this sense of personality, but the completeness of personality, the totality of the divine personality. And the root sounds, Bhagavan, also brings back the sense which you find in the Isha Upanishad, of the word Isha, the Lord, the enjoyer. So Bhagavan is the one who is the Lord, who is the enjoyer, and the divine personality in his completeness. So in this second verse, he builds from the first verse where the Brahman was the dominant theme, and in the second verse it has now become he, Bhagavan, the divine enjoyer, who is all being, all consciousness, all bliss. And you see the affirmation of the manifestation as divine, and the divine himself being the enjoyer in and of the manifestation. And this second verse now gives way to the third, where the movement goes deeper into the nature of the manifestation. Where does this manifestation come from? Of what is it made? And in the translation we read, He is without quality and supports all qualities. He has qualities, infinite qualities, and enjoys the state of being without quality. He himself transcends the state of being without qualities and the state of being with qualities. He is neither without quality nor with quality, because he is one and single. So you find four statements. If you looked at it purely from a logical, philosophical perspective, you would say they are different statements. They are related, they are similar, but they are different in what they say. On the one hand, you say he is without quality and supports all quality. And at the end, you say he is neither without quality nor with quality because he is one and single. What are you trying to say? In fact, there are 4 different perspectives of the same truth. But the play throughout is of the relationship of quality and transcendence of quality. And you see how this leads from first verse through second verse in the third verse, the means by which the divine manifests. Because he in his transcendence as Brahman, as Bhagavan, as Sir, he contains all potential. Ananta guna, infinite qualities. But you cannot say he is only infinite qualities because he also transcends the infinite qualities. So now the emphasis is on this character of being full of quality, and to understand that most profoundly, we are led through 4 steps. The first step is the most accessible to us, and it builds on the earlier preparation of our mind, where we saw that the true transcendence is not an abandonment but includes also. So when you say, I have transcended my attachment to food, it means not that you have freed yourself from the need of food. Rather, it means you have transcended the attachment, and therefore now you can actually enjoy without attachment. But the transcendence also means that you can abandon food if you so choose, and it could be just as much an expression of freedom as the enjoyment of the food would be. So this true sense of transcendence is not separation or abandonment, but inclusion from a poise of freedom. And this idea we have seen already in the first verse. When being and non-being are its forms, it is also beyond being and non-being. And that pattern we saw also in the second verse. Beyond all worlds, penetrating all worlds. Beyond being, beyond non-being, all being. So you see this play of the transcendence in relation to what is transcended, but without abandoning. That same idea continues with qualities. And if you had to say this with qualities, you would say having qualities, being free of qualities. But when you're free of qualities, you still have a relationship with quality, and you say you support quality. So this is the idea in the first line. He is without quality and supports all qualities. So there is the transcendence where you do not have quality. And yet in the transcendence you include all qualities in relation of support. This is easily accessible to our mind because of the previous preparation of the thought. But the next statement takes it a step further. He has qualities. Now he is actually made up of or contains qualities. How many? Infinite qualities. Ananta guna. We dwelt on this word ananta. In the Sanskrit it says saguno ananta guno nirgunatvam. So saguno is having qualities, ananta guno is infinite qualities, and nirgunatvam is in a state of being without quality. So it seems contradictory until you recognize it's the description of the same transcendence, but much more affirmative. So first when you say he has qualities, and it is infinite quality, ananta, we dwelt on the sense of ananta last time. The word infinite in English does not carry the full sense of ananta. Ananta has the sense of without end, literally translated anta. Anta is end, so without end. Infinite is a static concept, whereas without end is a dynamic, moving concept. When you say this is without end, you see in your mind a continuous movement, and the movement does not end. So when you say ananta guna, Qualities without end is the literal translation. And infinite qualities is a kind of approximation. But qualities without end now gives a very different picture. It means qualities are flowing out of Him unendingly. No quality is ever repeated. All quality emerging is new. And when you look at the universe in relation to that Ananta Guna, you can see the universe is nothing but that, the unfolding, outflowing of infinite, unending quality. That is the universe. That is manifestation. The full sense of manifestation is that the becoming into many, but it is an unending movement flowing out and out and out, manifesting continuously. It is not that it is thrown out in one big bang and that's it. After that it just goes on mechanically. It is continuously pouring itself out. And that's the sense of Ananta. So He has qualities, infinite qualities in the pouring out. But He's also without quality, and the translator puts it as, and enjoys the state of being without quality. Now this still carries the same idea of transcendence, but having gone much deeper into the truth of the quality and the play of the quality. More profoundly stated. And the next line takes us even further into a new depth of experience. And the translation goes, He Himself transcends the state of being without qualities and the state of being with qualities. So where is Brahman when we are talking of all this infinite quality and enjoying without quality? He Himself transcends the state of being without qualities. So on the one hand we said He enjoys being without quality, but even that He transcends. And then the state of being with quality, even that He transcends. And now suddenly you have a very different, deeper, more profound perception of who He is. Yes, He is quality, He is unending quality, He enjoys Himself being without quality, but He transcends that. And He transcends also the quality. But the transcendence, remember, is not exclusion. It includes the quality and the without quality. But there is something more, which is neither quality and not quality. That is what He is, much more profoundly. And already there we cannot visualize anymore, but we sense intuitively, and we must just lean on that. And one last stroke, a fourth step He leads to, which even breaks beyond that. He is neither without quality nor with quality, because He is one and single. That is how the translator has said, He is one and single. Actually, the Sanskrit word here is Kevala eva yaha. Kevala means alone. Eva, only, alone. Yaha, He. He who is alone only. So the literal translation would be, He is neither without quality nor with quality, because He is only alone. Now when you look at this, it breaks through all this discussion of quality, not quality, and being free of quality and being free of not quality. It takes you to a different level altogether when He says He is neither without quality nor with quality, because He is the alone. And it is He is still the being, the conscious Lord, alone. And in this aloneness, quality, not quality, transcendence of both merge into a single vision of Lord only. But you don't have a form, you cannot conceptualize it, because He has already transcended both. But the negation here is interesting. So far we said he is without quality and he is with quality. Now we say he is neither without quality nor with quality. So there's a further breaking out to this one being alone. Kevala. And the alone here, capital A, leads us into an experience of fusion in him. So far, when we started with the 3 steps before, you saw him, you saw his relation with quality and all that. But now in this last step, everything is dissolved and there is only the alone. And you are led to that merging into him. So this verse is very interesting because it, although highlighting the character of quality and unending outflow of quality, it frees you from that idea or the limitation of that idea until at some point there is only he. And in his aloneness, where is the pouring out? That is also there. And yet he still remains alone. So the 3rd verse has brought us to this understanding of how he manifests. But still, that's not enough. We need to go beyond that. Sri Aurobindo, through these first 5 verses, breaks all our preconceptions of the divine. He's not this, and yet he's this, and so on. And then the 6th verse will affirm, all these are but names. That which is called oneness and that which is called multiplicity, that which is called infinite and that which is called finite, all these names shine out indeed in the world whose very self is consciousness and which consists of consciousness alone. Kevala. So this is verse 6. I'm reading this out because we can sense the direction where this present discussion is taking us. It is going to lead us to this great perception and experience. But in the leading towards that, we have 2 more verses to cross. So the next verse, which now we take up, which we had not covered last time, is the 4th of the verses. In the translation, Sri Aurobindo plays with the dualities of our perception. Time, timeless, finite, infinite, one, many, form, formless, etc. So this unites all those distinctions and then describes how that union takes place. How does form emerge from formless? How does time emerge from timeless? How does finite emerge from infinity, and so on? And the answer to that is the power of his consciousness force, Chit Shakti. And the means is Vidya and Avidya. So the verse goes like this in the translation. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. He transcends time, becomes time. Infinite, he shines as finite. One, he becomes many. Formless, he assumes forms. He achieves all this by his consciousness force, which consists of knowledge and ignorance. And again, you will see the close parallels with the Isha Upanishad. Many of these ideas are actually covered there in a more elaborated form, and here Sri Aurobindo brings it all into an even more pithy, compact formulation. So the first line, he is beyond worlds, yet he holds the worlds. So the relationship is set. Although transcending And in saying beyond, we say even the worlds don't exist in the beyond. And yet, from the beyond, he holds the worlds. And then it's not enough. He becomes the worlds. How does he hold the worlds which are they different from him? No, he becomes the worlds and so he can hold them. But when he becomes the worlds, how can he be also holding and outside? He is equally inside. So, and enters into them. This is that triple status of transcendence, universality, and individuality. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. Now the pattern is set of these three steps, which pattern is implied in all the others phrases which follow. The phrase may simply say, he transcends time, becomes time. Infinite, he shines as finite. One, he becomes many. Formless, he assumes forms. But all of these four formulations are meant to follow the pattern which has been elaborated for the worlds. He is beyond worlds, yet he holds the worlds, he becomes the worlds and enters into time, and enters into them. The same pattern we must see when we read the next phrase. He transcends time, becomes time. Briefly stated, but this is the pattern of the Upanishadic style. You do not waste words. But the fact that the first one was elaborated is a sign that the others are also intended to be elaborated in our meditation. So if you follow the same pattern with time, we will say, he is beyond time, yet he holds time. He becomes time and enters into it. But instead of repeating this whole thing, he simply says, he transcends time, becomes time. But because it followed after the first elaboration, we know that we have to follow that same pattern. So we will read this as, he is beyond time, yet he holds the time. At the same time, he becomes time and enters into it. And you'll remember here the close parallel with Sri Aurobindo's description of that supramental time sense. The supramental consciousness lives in an eternity and even a timelessness, and yet it knows time. It is not timeless in separation, it knows time equally as itself expressed, itself manifested. And there's a further shift of the supramental consciousness entering now time and knowing it as a rhythmic self-expression of its own eternity and its freedom. And then it goes still further, enters into time and sees this pattern of moments. And then it goes still further, and in each moment it is present wholly. And at the same time it takes all these four poises. That is the supramental time sense. And straight away when you read this in the elaborated form, you see it's exactly that, differently stated. He is beyond the time, yet he holds time. He becomes time and enters into it. Into each moment, it is he who is present entirely. And yet, he is beyond, holds, becomes, and enters. And the same pattern we must follow with the next three phrases. So the next one is, infinite, he shines as finite. So if we had to elaborate it in the first pattern, we will say, he is beyond the finitenesses, infinite, yet he holds the finite. He becomes the finite and enters into it. So as the infinite, he transcends time first. But the relationship is that in his transcendence, he is supporting time. Time can exist because, finite. He is infinite and he supports the finite. In his transcendence of the finite, he supports the finiteness. But what is the relationship from his transcendence of infinity? It is he who becomes the finite and enters into it. The next phrase is of one, he becomes many. So the oneness and the many is played out. And again, to elaborate, we might put it this way: he is beyond multiplicity in his oneness, yet he holds the multiplicity. He becomes the multiplicity and enters into it. Because there is this poise, free of multiplicity, therefore he can support multiplicity and infinite multiplicity. This is the extraordinary character of this universe. You can go on dividing, you can go on breaking, you can go on splitting hairs finer and finer, and you can never lose yourself completely, because he supports all this infinite multiplicity from his poise of freedom from multiplicity. Because he is free, he can afford to allow himself to be divided as long as you want, as much as you want, in full security that you will never lose him. So this poise of being beyond multiplicity, that we call as oneness. In the oneness, you cannot even conceive of division. Because the moment you can imagine a division, well, there is something to be separated. But in pure oneness, you cannot even visualize two separate things. There is only oneness, indivisible. The concept of division does not exist. Because he is that, truly he can support infinite multiplicity. Being beyond, he holds the multiplicity. And it is he who becomes the multiplicity and enters into each fiber and thread. When you divide the finest fiber, divide the finest atom, finest subatomic particle, in each step of the division, he is present in each of those parts entirely and uniquely. Because he is one, indivisible. Therefore, he can be like this. And then the last of this chain, formless, he assumes forms. And when we elaborate it in the style earlier, we will say, perhaps, he is beyond forms, yet he holds the forms. He becomes the forms and enters into them. You see how profound this description is, how rich it is. And all that encapsulated in brief statement of the sutra, aphoristic style, formless, he assumes forms. And everything is said. Because he is formless, he can support and hold infinite possibility of forms. But where do those forms come from? He becomes them. That's how they appear. But when he becomes them, he is also in them. And therefore he enters into them entirely. With his entirety, uniquely in each form, at the same time. And this is possible because he remains always formless, free of form in his transcendence. So I reread these 5 steps now. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. He transcends time, becomes time. But now you see the elaboration. Infinite, he shines as finite. And again you have to dwell on the elaboration. One, he becomes many. And therefore he is in each. Formless, he assumes forms. At this point already it's obvious, every form is himself, every form is the divine, the Lord, in his totality, but uniquely expressed in his qualities of Ananta Guna. And therefore, within every form, you also see the Ananta Guna. though expressing a special emphasis of patterns of his qualities. And that is why no form can remain static. Each form must develop, must unfold the unendingness of its qualities. If you think of it like this, you can pick up any form in the universe and see the whole universe in it, the entirety of the Lord in it, as well as his entire journey of unfolding of himself. And it is a beautiful experience. So he has brought us to this point, first looking at the worlds, then at time, and then at space, finite, infinite, one, many, and formless and form. And how is this miracle achieved? Fivefold miracle. He achieves all this by his consciousness force, which consists of knowledge and ignorance. In the Sanskrit, we say, in the original Sanskrit, as Sri Aurobindo wrote it, okay, here it is. Vidya avidya maya chit shaktya. Chit Shakti, consciousness force, by the power of Chit Shakti, his consciousness force, and by the means of Vidya and Avidya. And again, we must lean back to our study of the Isha Upanishad, where this whole concept of Vidya and Avidya has been so much elaborated. But Chit Shakti was not developed there. It was not given so much prominence. It was implied but not made explicit. In Sri Aurobindo's articulation of the reality, Chit Shakti recovers its important place as the conscious power of the Lord, his power of consciousness by which all this is cast out. So, he achieves all this by his consciousness force, Chit Shakti, which consists of knowledge and ignorance. That is, the means that Chit Shakti uses is Vidya Avidya. Now you will remember Vidya and Avidya, Sri Aurobindo had translated. We speak of it as knowledge and ignorance because, as Sri Aurobindo had explained in his commentary, Vidya is the consciousness of oneness. Avidya is the consciousness of multiplicity. Now, when you enter the consciousness of oneness in anything, as you dwell and lean towards the oneness deeper within and beyond, you always grow in knowledge, deeper and deeper knowledge. Therefore, the consciousness of oneness is called knowledge. On the other hand, when you dwell on the consciousness of multiplicity in anything, the deeper you go, the more you split, the more you divide, the more you go into narrowness and limitation. And therefore, the consciousness of multiplicity has been described as ignorance, because at each step you're losing more and going into limitation and greater limitation. But we must understand the use of the words knowledge and ignorance, not in the sense of I know and I don't know, but this movement of tending towards oneness and tending towards multiplicity. So the means used by Chit Shakti is of this concentration leaning towards oneness and concentration dividing, multiplying and separating. In the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo puts it this way: there are two poles of existence, spirit above, matter below, and there is a continuous flow from spirit towards matter and from matter towards spirit. What is the nature of that flow? The first movement, spirit to matter, spirit is one, indivisible, matter is multiple, unable to unite. It is fragmented fundamentally. So the movement spirit to matter is this dividing movement of consciousness, multiplying, separating itself. Avidya. On the other hand, the return from matter to spirit can only take place when at each step, taking two distinct, separate, unreconcilable things, we find a deeper underlying unity between both, which transcends their distinctions. And at each step we go to a deeper unity. And the whole ascent from matter to spirit is a movement towards oneness, Vidya. But strictly speaking, they are not different. It is the same movement of turning to multiplicity, which reversed becomes returning to oneness. So if you look at it from a different perspective, there is no difference. It is the same thing, depending on whether you look from top down or bottom up, you call it differently. But it is the same thing, the same, if I may use that description, a lattice of division from one to many, which you are using to climb back to the oneness. If you're going up, you will say it is a movement to oneness. If you're going down, you say it's a movement to multiplicity. But it's the same thing. So even the phrasing here suggests that when Vidya, Avidya, Maya, by the means of Vidya, Avidya, and the joining of the two words Vidya, Avidya suggests it's actually one movement, which you can see as two separate tendencies. In practice, when we are inside the system, inside the play of the cosmos, it makes a huge difference which way you are going, up or down. And you see Vidya and Avidya as two very distinct modes, two very distinct movements. Within ourselves, in our mind, in our emotions, in our body, in our personality as a whole, we see this double pressure. There's a pressure of something which is always pushing us outwards into fragmentation. And there's something else which tends gently to pull us back into reunion, into oneness, into essentiality of that oneness. Which one your personality leans on at this moment will decide where you end up. When your consciousness is turned outwards, well, you will end up in a more fragmented, exteriorized, broken condition. When your consciousness is turned inwards, as long as it is turned inwards, you will tend towards a deeper unity and fusion and union. Essentiality, transcending the separations. And you cannot, at least initially, experience both at the same time, unless they are in different parts. It is only when the two fuse into each other and there is a single static state, so to say, of oneness linked with the multiplicity, the inner united with the outer, then you can say, I live within and act outward. But it is now a continuous state uniting both. Before that can happen though, we are moving inwards, we are moving outwards, and we are forming as if a bridge from the back and forth movements, linking two very different conditions, moving into very different opposite directions. So this means that consciousness force, Chit Shakti, uses to create this miracle is Vidya, Avidya. Consciousness of oneness, consciousness of multiplicity, upon which the Chit Shakti dwells, concentrates. So when Chit Shakti, as power of the Lord, is a self-awareness, dwells on himself, and he knows himself as this one conscious being, that takes the form of the experience of Vidya. When he dwells on himself as this infinite potential bursting out, becoming more and more distinct, and out of each distinctness, an infinity of potential further emerging, then by that dwelling we have Avidya and the multiplicity and the manifestation. The transcendence of worlds and entering of worlds, the transcendence of time and entry into time. Infinite, he shines as finite. One, he becomes many. Formless, he assumes forms. By this double power of Vidya, Avidya, of his Chit Shakti, consciousness force. Now, in this is encapsulated the whole description that Sri Aurobindo gives us of how the universe is born, and time, space, multiplicity, and worlds burst out from the oneness of the Lord. But you see how beautifully this huge, massive description and philosophy has been condensed into something so compact, so simple, and yet so profound. Perhaps because it is so simple, it becomes also so profound. So I reread this and we can dwell on it. How much time do we have? 2 hours. So. And we can meditate on this. I'll read it twice. The first time I will read it as it is, and the second time I will read it with the elaboration of each of the dualities, because it helps the mind to dwell on it, meditate on it much more, and then we will meditate on it for a few minutes. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. He transcends time, becomes time. Infinite, he shines as finite. One, he becomes many. Formless, he assumes forms. He achieves all this by his consciousness force, which consists of knowledge and ignorance. Now with the elaboration. He is beyond the worlds, yet he holds the worlds. He becomes the worlds and enters into them. He transcends time, yet he holds time. He becomes time and enters into it. He transcends the finite, yet he holds the finite. He becomes finiteness and enters into it. One, he transcends multiplicity, yet he holds the multiplicity, becomes the multiplicity, and enters into it. Formless, he transcends forms, yet he holds the forms. He becomes the forms and enters into them. He achieves all this by his consciousness force, Chit Shakti, which consists of knowledge, ignorance, vidya, avidya.